Recording in progress.
משכנותיך ישראל, מה טוב, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל, בנים ברוב כספך, עמו ביתך, אשתחווה אל היכל קודשך, ויראתך, מה טוב, אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל, אדוני אהבתי, ביום ביתך, ומקום משכן כבודך, משכן כבודך, ואני אשתחווה, ואפרח לפני אדוני, עושי
Shalom, such a warm welcome to everyone to be here this morning for Shabbat. As I said, service number 4, which we rarely do, Franklin Dean and I realise. So pay attention to the prayers and the words in this particular service, because it really plays on the strength of community and the benefit we get of belonging, Monty, the word that we will always forever associate with you, of belonging to a community together. Let's read on page 122. Eternal God, we come before you surrounded by members of our community. With them we share our happiness and it becomes greater, our troubles and they become smaller. May we never be too mean to give, nor too proud to receive. For in giving and receiving we discover you and begin to understand the meaning of life. Let us not separate ourselves from the true strength of our community, the experience and wisdom of old people, the hopes of the young, and the examples of care and courage which sustain us. Give us an open mind and a generous heart to welcome those who need us and to admit your presence into our daily life. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozeh Yisrael bikvora. We should revere God in all that we do, privately as well as publicly, acknowledge the truth and speak it in our hearts. Ribon kol ha'olamim, lo al tzidkotenu anachnu mapilim, tahunenu lafanecha, ki al rachamecha harabim. For what are we? What is our life? what our piety, what our goodness, what our strength? What can we say in your presence, eternal God? Are not the mightiest of us as nothing before you, the famous as though they'd never lived, the learned as if they had no knowledge, the wise as if without understanding? For most of what we do is futile, and our life on earth is but a span. Our superiority over other animals amounts to little, for all is vanity. Nevertheless, we are your people, children of your covenant, and called to your service. Therefore, it is right that we should thank and praise you, proclaim your holiness, and daily say before you,
Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matov, Matov, Matov Chelkeinu. Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matov, Matov, Matov Chelkeinu. Manayim, Manayim, Manayim Goraleinu. Manayim, Manayim, Manayim Goraleinu. Manayim, Manayim, Manayim Goraleinu. Manayim, Manayim, Manayim Goraleinu. Umayavah, 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 Yerushalayinu, Ashreinu. Umayavah, 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 Yerushalayinu, Ashreinu.
Page 124. Baruch Shema Haya Haolam Baruch Hu. Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Hamchulal b'fi amo, Meshubach umfa'ah b'lshon chasidav avadav, b'shfachot uvizmarot, nagadelcha v'namlichecha, malkeinu yachid chei ha'olamim. Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech mechulal b'tishbachot. Middle of page 125, as we continue to offer these verses of praise. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen. Baruch Adonai Elohim Elohei Yisrael oseh niflaot levado, uvaruch Shem kovodo, le'olam v'yemale chovodo, et kol haaretz. Amen ve'amen.
Nishmat kol chai, tevarech et shimcha.
Elohei harishonim v'ha'achronim, Eloha kol brichot Adon kol toladot, God of all ages, of all generations, of all creatures to whom our praise ascends. You guide the world with constant love, your children with tender care. To you alone we give thanks. Yet though our mouths should overflow with song as the sea, our tongues with exultation as the roaring waves, and our lips with praise as heaven's wide expanse, and though our eyes shine as the sun and moon, our arms spread forth like the wings of eagles, and our feet speed swiftly as hinds, still we could not fully thank you, eternal God, for your infinite kindness to our ancestors and to us. Therefore the limbs you've formed in us, the spirit you've breathed into us, the tongue you've set in our mouths, all shall unite to thank and praise, extol you and exalt you, the sovereign God. Every mouth shall thank you, every tongue bear witness to you, every knee shall bend to you, every body bow down to you, every heart shall revere you, and every fiber of our being shall sing your praise. Yishtabach, page 128. Stand if it's comfortable for you.
ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ. כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שיר ושבחה, הלל וזמרה, ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בשירי זמרה.
Baruch Hu, page 135.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzei or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol, hame'ir la'aretz v'ledarim aleha barachamim, uvtuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishit, ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita, malah ha'aretz kinyanecha, titbarach Adonai Eloheinu al shevach ma'aseh yadecha, v'yal morei or she'asita. Yefarucha Selah, Baruch Atah Adonai, Yotzei Hamorot. And together, great is your love for us, eternal God, and abundant your compassion. Our ancestors trusted in you. You taught them the laws of life. So be gracious to us and teach us. Incline our hearts to hear your words, to know and understand, to learn and teach, and with love to uphold the truths of your Torah. Enlighten us with your teaching, make us faithful to your commandments, and wholehearted in the love and awe of your name. For in love you summon us to serve you and proclaim your unity. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher bi'amo Yisrael, bi'ahava. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto le'olam va'ed.
V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavecha, u'v'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol mo'odecha. V'hayu hadavarim ha'ele, asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha. V'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam. V'shiftecha b'veitecha, u'v'leftecha b'derech, u'v'shoppecha u'kumecha. Ukashatam laot al yadecha, v'hayu latotafot beinenecha, katavtam al muzot beitecha, uvisharecha.
למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. ואני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Emet v'yatziv v'yashav v'kayam v'tov v'yafeh hadavar hazeh, aleinu le'olam va'ed. Emet she'ata hu Adonai Eloheinu, v'Elohei avotenu, malkeinu melech avotenu, yotzreinu tzur yeshuotenu, podenu matzilenu me'olam hu shemecha, ואין אלוהים זולתך. אמת אתה הוא ראשון ואתה הוא אחרון, ומבלעדיך אין לנו מושיע. ממצרים גלתנו אדוני אלוהינו, ומבית עבדים פדיתנו. משה, מרים ובני ישראל, לך אנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ואמרו כולם. Song, the redeemed sang to your name at the shore of the sea. With one accord they gave thanks and proclaimed your sovereignty. Stand for the tefillah. Adonai, sefatai tiftachu v'yagidei ilatecha. Adonai, sefatai tiftachu v'yagidei ilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Hasadim Tovim, v'Konei Hakol, v'Zocher Hasdei Avot v'Imahot, u'Mevi Gula livnei v'nehem, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר מושיע מגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מזריח השמש ומוריד הטל. אתה להחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך. קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו מלא עולם. במקומך מלכנו תופיע, ותמלוך עלינו, כי מחכים אנחנו לך.
Doch Adonai leolam, Elohai Tzion. Adon, Alleluia. Ledov Adon, Ledov Adon, Ledov Adon, Nagid Rod Lecha, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Kedushat Chanakdish, Ledov Adon, Ledov Adon, Ledov Adon, Nagid Rod Lecha, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Kedushat Chanakdish, V'shivamai Eloheinu, Miminu lo yamush leolam ba'ed, Ki el melech gadol, Ki el melech gadol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ledov Adon, Ledov Adon, Ledov Adon, Nagid Rod Lecha, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Kedushat Chanakdish.
Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. Let's sit down as we pause and mark Shabbat.
Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Makadashim Shvi Shabbat, Kulam Yisbu V'yitangu Mituvech HaShabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. V'hashvi'i ratzita bo v'kidashto Shabbat. Gad yamim, oto karavta Shabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Zecher l'maseh b'reishit Shabbat. Zecher l'maseh b'reishit Shabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Yismachu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat.
Your gracious love, Eternal One, let the holiness of Shabbat enter our hearts. May all of Israel, the Jewish community, be exalted by its peace. Baruch atah Adonai Makadesh HaShabbat. Page 144. Ratzei Adonai Eloheinu, bi'amcha Yisrael, u'tefilatam bi'ahava tekabel, u'tehila ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha, Baruch atah Adonai, she'otecha levadecha b'yirah na'avod. And as we offer our penultimate prayer of the tefillah, the prayer that calls on us to find space in our lives for appreciation and gratitude, Modim anachnu lach she'ata hu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu le'olam va'ed. Tzur hayenu, magen yeshenu, ata hu lado vado, nodeh lecha nsaper tehilatecha, al hayenu hamsurim biyadecha, v'al nishmotenu hapakudot lach, v'al nisecha shebachol yom imanu, v'al niflotecha v'tovotecha shebachol eit erev v'avoker v'tzoharayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Hatov Shimcha Ulacha Na'er Lohodot.
Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chilat chesed v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, Barchinu Avinu kulanu ke'echad, ve'or panecha, ki ve'or panecha natata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chema chesed v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Al kol Yisrael amecha, Torat chayim ve'avat chesed, u'tzedaka uvracha v'rachamim v'chayim v'shalom. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chema chesed v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, v'tov b'einecha, levarech et amcha Yisrael, b'chol et u'b'chol shah, b'shlomecha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chema chesed v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha.
Baruch atah Adonai, oseh hashalom. Let's take a few moments for silent prayer.
Ratzon Hirevi V'egyon Levi Lefanecha Adonai Turi, Vergoali, Adonai Turi, Vergoali, Ratzon, Irefi, Vergon Libi, Lefanefa, Adonai Turi, Vergoali, Adonai Turi, Vergoali. Ose shalom bimroma, v'yase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol bnei Adam. Ose shalom bimroma, v'yase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol bnei Adam. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Just what we need. Beautiful, rousing prayer. We are on page 481 as we turn to the heart of the Shabbat morning service of Kriyat HaTorah, 481. I said last night, but it really does feel like we're really grateful that you are home and safe. Some of you will have seen the films that David shared that he made in Mariupol, and just the extraordinary closeness that he was, of what he saw, of how moved, and just we are grateful that you're home and that you're celebrating your birthday this weekend, David. So lovely to have you on the bima with Valerie. So, page 481. Stand when you're ready.
Ein kamocha va'Elohim Adonai, v'ein kamasecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai oz le'amo yiteh, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Gadlul Adonai iti onoromama shemo yachdav.
Lecha Adonai hagedula, v'hagvura v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach v'hahod. All b'shamayim ba'aretz, lecha Adonai hamamlacha, v'hamitnaseh l'kol l'rosh.
Beautiful. Let's sit down. So we love talking about the dryness of Vayikra, of Leviticus, of how much harder it is, I always work much harder with our B'nai Mitzvah students when their B'nai Mitzvah falls in this book to work harder to find resonance. But I find this week's portion surprisingly easy to engage with, because we're in Sav, which of course comes from the root of the word mitzvah, commandment. We're at the final part of it, as we're trying to do this year, to read the third reading of each portion. And we are in the section of the priests being dressed in a particular way. And I think this strikes me as very interesting and relevant. We're going to hear the Haftarah that makes a link with the dismissal, the idea that Jeremiah brings that sacrifice is really not the only way that you connect with God and live a pious life. And the Judeans really had a strong sense that the temple, that sense of sacrifice would keep them safe, and obviously it didn't. But here we have the first time that we're being told about sacrifice, but also the first time we're being told about what's remarkable or special about the high priest, the clothes the high priest has to wear. And I think if we try, as we try to do, to bring meaning from what's in Torah to contemporary Judaism, but not even contemporary, to rabbinic Judaism. The rabbis, Talmudic rabbis, and even the medieval commentators like Ibn Ezra and Rashi are really struggling to be able to make a connection between this detailed list of what the high priest should wear, of how they behave, of how leaders having that much influence and authority should carry themselves. Here we hear that Moses is told to wash them, to wash Aaron, the high priest, and his sons, to dress them in a certain way. We get the idea of the bishop's mitre, mitznefet, here in Torah, and just how they have to be set apart. And what do we expect from religious leadership now? And of course, strange for me to talk about it, but I think a great deal of how we as student rabbis were told how to present ourselves in congregations, how men and women amongst us had to decide what we were going to wear, what carried authority or responsibility with us. I remember one of my colleagues being chastised because he always looked too relaxed on the bima, and we women loved it that he was being given grief about what he wore and not just the women. But that sense that you carry something, what is it that we need from those who carry authority in front of us or lead us with a certain spiritual direction? And Maimonides spoke a great deal in the Mishnah Torah of that all these verses of sacrifice in Torah was a way, almost like a child's training wheels, stabilizers on their bike, was to help the Israelites, the house of Israel, Jews that they would become ready for a more adult way of engaging with God, that did away with these tangible rites of sacrifice. They weren't ready in Torah to be able to interact or have a sense of an invisible God that they did not have to worship in this wildly tangible way. So just bring that sensibility with you into these words of Torah. Let's see how they strike us on this morning as we're about to celebrate Purim. So let me make sure I'm in the right place before I call up James. Ya'amod, Chaim ben Baruch, levarech et haTorah. Baruch Adonai Hamavorach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim Ve'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, קח את אהרון ואת בניו איתו, ואת הבגדים, ואת שמן המשחה, ואת פר החטאת, ואת שני האלים, ואת סל המצות, ואת כל העדה, הקהל אל פתח אוהל מועד. ויעש משה כאשר ציווה אדוני אותו. ותקהל העדה אל פתח אוהל מועד. ויאמר משה אל העדה, זה הדבר אשר ציווה אדוני לעשות. ויקרב משה את אהרון ואת בניו, וירחץ אותם במים, וייתן אליו את הכתונת, ויחגור אותו באבנת, ויבוש אותו את המעיל, וייתן אליו את האפוד, ויחגור אותו בחשב האפוד, ויאפוד לו בו, וישם אליו את החושן, וייתן אל החושן את האורים ואת התומים, וישם את המצנפת על ראשו, וישם על המצנפת אל מול פניו את ציץ הזהב, נזר הקדוש, כאשר ציווה אדוני את משה. ויקח משה את שמן המשחה, וימשח את המשכן ואת כל אשר בו, ויקדש אותם. ויז ממנו על המזבח 7 פעמים, וימשח את המזבח ואת כל כליו, ואת הקיר ואת כינור לקדשם. ויצוק משמן המשחה על ראש אהרון, וימשח אותו לקודשו, ויקרב משה את בני אהרון, ויבשם כתונת, ויחגור אותם אבנת, ויחשב להם מקבעות כאשר ציווה אדוני את משה. So God spoke to Moses, saying, "Take Aaron and his sons and all the clothes, so the clothes that they're going to wear, and the oil for anointing." And Shemen HaMishcha is literally the oil for giving smicha, for anointing them as leaders. And also the offering, the sin offering, and 2 rams, and also a basket of unleavened bread. And assemble all the community at the door of the tent of meeting. Rashi suggested that this was a miraculous moment because the community would have been way too big to have fitted into that tiny place at the door of the tent of meeting, whereas Ibn Ezra suggests that actually just a few of them gathered, maybe just the leaders of the tribe. And Moses did everything that God commanded him to do, and he gathered the community at the door of the tent of meeting. And Moses spoke to the people and says, "This is the thing that God commanded us to do." And Moses gathered Aaron and his sons, and Moses washed them with water. And Moses gave them their tunics to wear, and tied a girdle around them so that they were wearing a girdle around their waist, and dressed them in their coats, so the tunic underneath and the coats, and then gave them the ephod, and which is some kind of breastplate, we think, and placed it on them, or tied it round them, basically tied it round them, the ephod, so that the ephod should be on them. And then Moses rested on them the breastplate and gave to them on the breastplate, and we're really not sure what the Urim and Tumim are, but some kind of oracle that rested on them. This is what the priest was wearing, and placed the mitznefet, the mitre, on his head. Now it seems to be just Aaron that he's dressing, and to place on the mitre opposite, so literally kind of opposite his forehead, the gold plate and the holy crown that is placed just as God had commanded Moses to do. And Moses takes up the oil for anointing, and he anoints the altar and all that is within the altar, and sanctifies it, all of it. And then Moses places or pours on the altar, sprinkles this oil on the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and now sprinkles it on the altar 7 times, very precise. And then Moses anoints the altar and all the utensils that are on the altar, from the basin, we talked about the basin that held the water, to the pedestal or the stool that was alongside it, in order to sanctify all of it. Then he pours the oil, the anointing oil, literally pours it onto Aaron's head and anoints him, and really anoints him and makes him holy, separate from it. Then Moses draws near the sons of Aaron and now dresses them with their katonet, with their tunic, and also with the ephod, with the girdle round their waist, and places on them, and I have forgotten the word for mikbaot, if anyone can help me, otherwise I will check it. If anyone's watched, hold on, because I really want to remember what this word is, but I'm not. Bear with me while I find it. Mikbaot. Seeing as we're having the detail of everything that they're doing. Mikbaot. Let me just go back to the page. I'm looking, probably someone's telling me in the chat, but I'm not looking at the computer. Sashes, thank you so much. And places sashes on them, just as God had commanded him to do.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת בחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. Yesha Koach, James. Lovely for you to come and bless Torah. So as you stand, I just want to remind you that when I first arrived at FPS 11 years ago, I was told by many people that they chose this congregation because they could arrive in their jeans and no one said anything, having come maybe from other branches of Judaism where it mattered more what they wore. So I think it's so interesting for us in this congregation more than ever to read this intricate description of the minutiae of what was important and to see whether it adds or detracts, what difference it makes to worship. Let's stand as we raise the scroll. Thank you, David.
Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'amor Yisrael V'kedushato Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtakavru behar kosho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtakavru behar kosho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtakavru behar kosho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtakavru behar kosho.
Let's sit down as we go into the Haftarah. The Haftarah is from the prophet Jeremiah. We know that Jeremiah is active is active at the end of the 7th century. He's going to be with them through the dramas that unfold. This particular moment, they're living in this political melting pot of Egypt and Babylon being the greatest powers that are occupying the ancient Near East at the time. Egypt, we think that this speech that the words come from is part of what's known as the Temple Sermon, a long stretch of chapters of Jeremiah's where he's really chastising the people to say, you're not safe just because you've got the temple, because you're offering sacrifice, that actually there's way more that is needed in your relationship with God and the way you behave. Jeremiah, of course, constantly prophesying that things are not going to go well. He is with them when the temple does fall. This we think, because a great deal is dated for Jeremiah, because Jeremiah had a secretary, Baruch, that wrote everything down. Jeremiah, the most dramatic, hysterical of the prophets, but felt deeply, resisted being called to prophecy, and then managed to really chart and capture that particular moment in history and in biblical narrative. So we think that this moment is coming just at the beginning of King Jehoiakim's reign, and just what he is foreseeing happening. I think it's really interesting for us, the connection with the Torah, especially as progressive Jews. And I really like that this Haftarah is really chosen in the progressive lectionary and also by Plaut, is that the connection is, of course, that sacrifice is being taught in the Torah portion of Tzav, and yet here in the Haftarah, we're being told to take it with a pinch of salt because there's way more to a religious life. Andrea, delighted that you will read Torah for us.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bahar b'neviim tovim, v'ratzah b'divreichem hane'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher b'Torah, uve'Moshe avdo, uve'Yisrael amo, uve'neviim ha'emet v'tzedek. Thus say the Eternal, the God of Israel, add your burnt offerings to your sacrifices and eat the flesh. For in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. But this command I gave them, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people, and walk in all the way that I command you, that it may be well with you. But they did not obey and incline their ear, but walked in their own counsels and the stubbornness of their evil hearts, and went backward and not forward. From the day that your fathers came out of the land of Egypt to this day, I have persistently sent all my servants the prophets to them, day after day, yet they did not listen to me or incline their ear, but stiffened their neck. They did worse than their fathers. So you shall speak all these words to them, but they will not listen to you. You shall call to them, but they will not answer you. And you shall say to them, this is the nation that did not obey the voice of the Eternal, their God, and did not accept discipline. Truth has perished, it is cut off from their lips. Cut off your hair and cast it away. Raise a lamentation on the bare heights, for the Eternal has rejected and forsaken generation of his wrath. For the sons of Judah have done evil in my sight, declares God. They have set their detestable things in the house that is called by my name to defile it. And they have built the high places of Topheth, which is the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Eternal, when it will no more be called Topheth, or the valley of the sons of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth, because there is no room elsewhere. And the dead bodies of this people will be for food for the birds of the air and for the beasts of the earth, and none will frighten them away. And I will silence in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, for the land shall become a waste. At that time, declares the Eternal, the bones of the king of Judah and the bones of its officials, the bones of its priests, the bones of its prophets, and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be brought out of their tombs, and they shall be spread before the sun and the moon and all the host of heaven, which they have loved and served, which they have gone after, and which they have sought and worshipped, and they shall not be gathered or buried. They shall be as dung on the surface of the ground. Death shall be preferred to life by all the remnant that remains of this evil family in all the places where I have driven them, declares the eternal God. Thus says the Eternal One, let not the wise glory of their wisdom, let not the mighty glory of their in their might, let not the rich glory in their riches, but let them who glory in this, that they understand and know me, that I, the Eternal, practice kindness, justice, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things do I delight, says the Eternal One. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, sur kol ha'olamim, Sadiq b'ha hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'emah, ha'omar v'oseh, hamdaber u'mekadayim shekel devara, emet v'tzedek.
Let's stand as we prepare to put the scroll away and pause for prayers for our congregation.
Eternal God, we ask your blessing on our Queen Elizabeth and all the royal family, as well as those who govern our country. Guide them and all who govern with a spirit of wisdom and compassion, so that they care for the citizen and the stranger and bring benefit to all the inhabitants of our land and the world. Bless all our brothers and sisters of the house of Israel. Bless our congregation and all its members. Be with those who seek your presence, and all are in need of healing, spiritual and physical. Let them know that you are near to comfort and sustain them.
We're just going to pause and just name those who are unwell in the congregation at this time, so that we add their names to our prayer and ensure that we know those who are caring for them and supporting them. Continue to pray for Anna's recovery and growing strength as she comes home and rebuilds her life surrounded by her loving family. We think of Barry J, who continues to be unwell. We pray and just mention him and his family in our thoughts. Are there other names that we should be remembering now and naming of those who need our support and care? Renzo, I think, is either home or on his way home, has made superb recovery, has greatly benefited from the visits he's received from our congregation. So wishing them a refuah shlema in all that they're meant to be, well spiritually and physically, and for their carers to feel that support from us as the congregation. And let us say, Amen. Amen.
May peace exist in the state of Israel soon and in our time. May you, eternal God, grant blessing to her, established as an age-old dream and the home to the oppressed. May its leaders and citizens be inspired with a faithfulness to the aims of its founders, and may the country be imbued with the prophetic ideals of liberty and justice always. May this Shabbat renew our energy to build and sustain a better world, and to deepen our gratitude of so much that surrounds us. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. And we'll offer a prayer for Ukraine at the end of the service when we offer a leaning. Thank you. So page 486. Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, ki nizgav shemo lavado.
Ono aretz v'shamayim, yarim keren le'amo, tegila l'kol chasidav, livnei Yisrael, am karomo. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Ki lecha tov natati lechem, Torati al ta'azovu.
Et Chaim hi lamachazikin ba v'tom echera meushar d'rachecha darcheno v'chol netivoteha shalom Ashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Yameinu kekedem Chadesh Yameinu kekedem.
So as we sit down and see, I wanted us to do a bit of study today, so we're just waiting to see if we have the right projector to enable you to learn a little bit about Purim. It is a mitzvah to hear the words of the Megillah, or indeed study the words of the Megillah, the book of Esther. And as this Shabbat is our moment in our congregation for celebrating and connecting with Purim, it seemed appropriate to share a little this morning. We have to keep an eye on the time because we know that our Purim celebration starts promptly after the service, with people doing so by finding clues of Purim all around Barnet and Hertfordshire, created by the amazing Nina Hirsch. So I'm just waiting one moment to do that. But while I do so, is there anyone in the congregation, not to embarrass either Jane or Monty, that might be able to go past Barnet, well, it's really just past Totteridge, to give Monty a lift home, as Jane is already here? Fantastic. David. Monty, you okay? David's going to give you a lift home, and then it means Jane. Well, I don't know. David might not be as lovely as Jane, but he has offered to take you home. So, Jane, you can save your car action for a moment. I know, we could auction. All of us auction who gets to drive Monty home. So, let me tell you a bit about Purim. You know a lot about it, but I'm particularly interested this year in recalling why liberal Judaism decided that Purim needed to be exiled or excluded from our annual calendar for quite a long time. And those of you who've been in liberal Judaism longer than I have, I was not born into liberal Judaism, will recall. What I do know is that under John Rayner, when he was at LJS, he started to talk with greater equanimity around Purim, and why Purim, why we as liberal Jews should indeed be able to cope with Purim. So just before we begin looking at the text, and we don't have so long, can anyone remember that time of no Purim in the liberal tradition? Michael, do you want to, I'll try and say it again if you can't hear at home. Michael, tell us, what was it like? Did it just pass unnoticed?
It was, no, it was, I was there when it all started.
When it came back?
Yeah, and we had Purim parties for the first time and dressing up. I've got a photo of me of a thing as about an 8-year-old, and that was the first time, so that would have been about 66 or so.
So, anyone remember before that, when it was outlawed? I rather like the drama of the idea of it being outlawed. No one recalls what happened? Anyone at home remember? Frank, I bet Purim came back under your reign here. Feel free to unmute yourself. Yep.
We always did Purim.
So FPS always did it. Even before, okay, so since Frank arrived, so when you arrived, you did Purim. Okay.
We've always done that. We've always done it.
FPS has always done it.
Always.
So FPS stood outside of the brink of LJS and others that outlawed Purim.
I remember it. I remember when it happened and it was a big excitement. So maybe Josie's done a job. She's got probably better memory.
Okay.
Maybe it's His Majesty.
Maybe
So as Her Majesty the Queen said, people remember things differently. So maybe Purim. So let's have a look at why. So I'm just going to show you a few parts of the text of us understanding why this text, why this book felt so embarrassing and inappropriate to be read in a liturgical fashion and to be able to kind of bring it into the realm. The story of Purim, as we know, let me just give some historical context to it, because there definitely seems to be grains of historicity in this book. We think the book probably dates itself to the 3rd or 4th century before the Common Era, just after the Persian era. In fact, anyone that's gone to the British Museum, when you see statues of Xerxes there, Xerxes and Ahasuerus may have been modelled on such a king, Xerxes. And so there is these like tiny elements of historicity in the story alongside things that absolutely wouldn't have happened. So the story seems to be this extraordinary mixture of possibility of strong historical context with a fanciful story. Just before we look at the text, what might have been fanciful about the story? How does the story end? Huge massacre with numbers beyond comprehension. We're going to have a look at. Can I start screen sharing now? Yeah? Do you think it'll work? Yes, try. Okay. So I'm going to screen share just a few texts. Let me just, okay, can you see where, yeah? Okay, so I really wanted to show you this final verses of what was described of the turn of the story. This is the preeminent story of diaspora Jewry. Diaspora Jewry, one other festival in our cycle is outside Torah. What is it? Hanukkah. So Hanukkah and Purim. But this particular seems to be the story of how you live as a diaspora Jew. So after we know the story that Esther gets pulled into the palace, the Persian palace, we know that is highly unlikely, that Persian royalty married into their own family. So to have a beauty contest of girls from all over the empire seems unlikely. So I'm just beginning with this final bit. After Haman, whether a fictional person or not, has plotted against the Jews that live in the empire, again, highly unlikely if they're already living there, the ease with which to turn the rest of the people against them. But it is the sheer violence at the end of this story where Jews were able to turn their plight around. Look away if you don't like to see the screen move. But I just want to show you the numbers at the end. Would someone like to read in English that verse? The rest of the Jews.
The rest of the Jews, those in the king's provinces, likewise mustered and fought for their lives. They disposed of their enemies, killing 75,000 of their foes. They did not lay hands on the spoil.
Okay, laying their hands not on the spoil seems to really be a play on the Amalekites and the Haftarah that we read last week about Saul, who did lay his hands on the spoil, whereas they behaved well and did not touch anything. But nonetheless, 75,000 seems extreme. Liberal Judaism was uncomfortable. What was one of the tenets of liberal Judaism when it began? Universality, the sense that our Judaism only enabled us to be better citizens, better humans that cared for our fellow men and women. So to celebrate a festival that ended with this profundity of violence felt impossible for many liberal Jews. Frank's remembering that that FPS always did it under his reign, but much of liberal Judaism had to reject it because they were uncomfortable with it. Any thoughts on that, on why, and on whether you are comfortable with such elements of a story being read now in our celebration of Purim? And then we're going to look at 2 other texts in it. Feel free at home if you want to say something, because we probably can hear you at home. Or anyone here? Yeah, Andrea.
It's a beautifully constructed book, I think, Esther. But then you come to the last chapter, I think it's the last 2 chapters, where it's obviously been tacked on by somebody else anyway, because the whole language changes. From going from the very formalised use of language and court language and storytelling, it suddenly takes shortcuts.
An interesting thought, so not shared by lots of commentators who see it as a really integrated book that actually sustains itself from beginning to end.
And then the language changes.
James.
What's the difference between Saul's destruction of the Amalekites, which is also ruthless? What's the difference between Joshua's invasion, essentially, of Canaan and the destruction of many tribes that were there, and this?
None in the way the story is told, but the way, if this is a parable of being able to turn things on its head, then possibly. But I think that's exactly right, that the violence, the vehemence, is no different than Saul and the Amalekites. Saul is punished for not following God's command by keeping Agag, the king, alive, by hearing that sheep bleating so that he's kept all the spoil. But actually, no. What we studied in Delving into Judaism this week is, I don't know if any of you remember that Purim of 1995, when Dr. Baruch Goldstein, a settler in Jerusalem, went into Hebron. I remember because I was studying in the States, and I remember hearing the news and being unable and so distressed by it being hung on Purim that he went into Hebron and went into a mosque, and the words that he'd left connected his crime very much to Purim, that he killed worshippers, 27 worshippers in a mosque on the day of Purim. And there is much written about him now, that he is venerated by some in his community, and his grave honoured in the way, and yet a fearful sense of taking a biblical text. Tamara.
For me, I feel like this story, I think this story feels like a classic example of the sort of carnivalesque, of topsy-turvydom. We're not really meant to, it's a fairy tale or a fable, we're not really meant to believe that it's true. It seems like a classic fantasy of the oppressed, and Purim for me feels like an opportunity to respond to an experience of oppression with laughter and hilarity and joy, and to be allowed to entertain all of those terrible feelings. And so I don't think that necessarily makes it an easy festival, but that's how it reads to me, is that it's a moment in which you're allowed to imagine the world the other way up, where you're not at the bottom, you're on the top.
And John, I think John Rayner captured that, what you're saying very well, when he said we can cope with levity. This season of levity, we can cope with it without seeing it as a prescription of how we behave. Absolutely. Let me just show you. Let's just have a look at the beginning, because there's something so playful about the first chapter, really, and what happens with Vashti and Esther, and how Esther is introduced. Many study Joseph in the book of Genesis and the book of Esther and see a comparable experience, that Joseph becomes this diaspora Jew, obviously anachronistically, it wasn't Judaism yet, but is able to infiltrate or assimilate or be integrated into the court, given a huge influence over the people of the land, be able to do things for his own people as well as the wider people in the same way that Esther does. But let's just have a look at the beginning. So it happened in the days of Ahasuerus, Vayihi bimei Ahasuerus, and then Ahasuerus is really described as an emperor reigning over 127 provinces from India to Nubia. So far, so historical, which is what makes the book really compelling. And actually, what Andrea says is it's beautiful Hebrew, very easy Hebrew. And often biblical Hebrew, those studying biblical Hebrew, this is the first book that you use because the Hebrew is so manageable. So he occupied the throne. He gave a banquet. How long did his banquet last for? Have a look at that line. 180 days. That's 6 months of banquet. And lo and behold, it turns out that the Persians did feast in that way. So far, this sense of empire, rather like an Alexander the Great, and he was, we can see, or Persia did allow different tribes and ways of life to exist. The end of the banquet, king gives another banquet, and then what happens? Royal wine served in abundance, no restrictions. Rabbi Yuval Karen and I have been talking Purim a great deal before our class this week, and it turns out that alcohol was used a great deal in Persian government decision-making. You never made a decision about anything important if you didn't have a drink before it. I'm sure there's loads of parliamentary jokes I could make, but I won't right now. But I cannot resist this, the playful description of Vashti and Esther. How can we not have this? That Vashti is treated like a concubine, is asked to visit the king in the evening and rejects it. It might not just have been the way that rabbinic commentary suggests that she's asked to come naked. Tamara, can you read the text? Do you want to read this, please?
Sorry, yes. In addition, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the seventh day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing a royal diadem to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed and his fury burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages, learned in procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to all who were versed in royal precedent. What, he asked, shall be done, according to law, to Queen Vashti, for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus, conveyed by the eunuchs? Thereupon, Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offence not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the peoples in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behaviour will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him that she would not come. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media, who heard of the queen's behaviour, will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation. If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus. And let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who is more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm, vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike. The proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as
It's funny that once we study that in this way, how can it not be a pantomime-like book, right? The idea that that was court. So also the notion that Esther, and just looking at the time, there's one verse that I want to draw our attention to, as we did last night. How can Esther, to have had that exposure, to have got into the harem, to have been working so closely with her uncle or her partner, we're really not sure. Dod is both uncle and potentially love, as Dodi li va'ani lo, I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. That Esther was able to keep her Judaism a secret and yet be implanted in the palace in this way. Most unlikely that she was ever able to do it. But there is something about this, and here I had bought, we studied this a great deal with delving into Judaism. But let's have a look just in chapter 4, when Mordecai is persuading Esther to risk her life by speaking to the king and sharing who she is and what she's asking for. And to me, I think this phrase, this part of the verse really captures the Purim story so beautifully. So Mordecai is saying this to Esther: go, take a risk, go and speak to the king. Again, highly unlikely that she would ever have been able to do that. But I think this really is very beautiful. So would someone, tomorrow you're really, you're doing so well for us, reading. Might you read Mordecai's words?
On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis.
So I just love the Hebrew also for this. Umi yodea im le'et kazot higat Lamalchut. Who knows whether it was for this moment that you managed to get into the palace. And I shared that Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, who I think is a tremendous chief rabbi and a mensch of the highest proportions, gave thought for the day, where he talked about the Russian journalist who stood in front of behind the newsreader and who risked really life and limb to offer that critique of the government. And it's extraordinary that she's alive today, and long may it be the case. And he described it as a Queen Esther moment and suggested that all of us in our lives, and I said this last night, all of us in our lives have constant Queen Esther moments where we are called to consider, am I in this place? Have I survived what I've survived through to get to this moment? And actually, it's all been for this. And I really loved how he made that connection between that journalist and Queen Esther. And if we follow Rabbi John Rayner, Tamara Joseph's notion that we can cope with this topsy-turvy, playful Megillah of the Book of Esther, not see it as prescriptive, be as critical of the description of violence as James encouraged us to be, because there's no difference between any of the conquests we see throughout Torah, throughout Tanakh. If we're able to play with it, then surely we can draw something from it and really think in our own lives, in what moment have we arrived at that we are able to say, it is for this that I am here. So let us go to finish the service now and invite our children in as we go straight into Aleinu. Sorry that those of you at home couldn't hear those speaking here. It was an experiment. We will get better at that hybrid notion. Let's stand for Aleinu, page 520. congregation to the yahrzeits that fall this Shabbat. We think particularly of Berta Levis, aunt, and Sadie Pruth, grandmother of Josie Kinchin, great aunt and great grandmother of Paula Kinchin Smith. We think of Honey Lichtenstern, grandmother of Jackie Lichtenstern, and of Paul Oppenheimer, husband of Corinne Oppenheimer. Zichronam livracha. May their memories be for a blessing, and may those who recall and remember their loved ones be comforted in their loss as we say the words of the Kaddish together. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shamei rabbah, v'yama divrach yorutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'hayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dochol beit Yisrael, magalav izman kari v'imru amen, yehei shmei rabbah mavorach leolam omer maya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ah v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithada v'yitale v'talal shemei dekudusha brichu, leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, da'amiram b'yama v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shamaya, v'hayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimramav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'yal kol b'nei Adam, v'imru amen. So I'm just going to let Tamara hop on up as we prepare for Adon Olam to finish our service, and we're moving towards a slightly nicer Kiddush.
Right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
And just to start with Kiddush, because this is important, is it the children at the front and everyone else at the back today?
Exactly.
Right, so kids, your Kiddush is set out at the back, for adults at the front, kids at the front, adults at the back. And yes, so looking forward to that. So welcome everyone, a very warm welcome to Finchley Progressive Synagogue, whether you are joining us from home or whether you are here with us in the building, and a very particular welcome to people who are returning to us now in the building after a long absence and who've not been here for a while. Perhaps you're back for the first time. A particularly warm welcome to you. Thank you to everyone who led and participated in the service. To David and Valerie. David, I'm so delighted to see you back with us. I know you know that you have been in the thoughts and the hearts and prayers of all of us, and wonderful to have you back in the building and to know that you're safe. Thank you to James, to Andrea, to Howard. So I have a few community announcements. As you can tell, we're in the middle of Purim. For those of you who are lucky enough to have a space in the car rally, you should be meeting outside in a little less than quarter of an hour in the car park to set off. For everyone else, at 4:30, there's Torah Tots with Rabbi Rebecca, and the Purim Spiel is at 5. So see you back here at 5 for the Purim Spiel. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, there's Cafe Ivrea on the theme Being There. It's led by Anne Andrews, who I think is one of our security volunteers today. You probably saw her on the way in. And at 3 o'clock, there's the memorial service for Rosita Rosenberg, who was for decades a leading figure in liberal Judaism. And if you'd like to attend that funeral service either online or in person, then the details for how to contact her community in Elstree are in the community email. All of our regular activities are continuing as usual this week. On Wednesday at 6, the adult B'nai Mitzvah class is on the subject a Devar Torah structure from the group. And at 7 o'clock, the Delving into Judaism class is on passing over to Pesach. On Thursday, our collaborative Torah study class continues, led by Rabbis Yuval Karen and Rebecca Burke. This week's subject is Moses, a man of God or a demigod? What a provocative title. And on Thursday at 7:30, there's a special Beit Midrash session, Ordinary Germans in Extraordinary Times. It's about the importance of free speech and democracy in preventing persecutions and genocide. It could hardly be more timely or relevant. It's being delivered by Ernie Hunter, who's the founder and chair of the Northern Holocaust Education Group. He's the son of a German Jewish refugee mother and a German non-Jewish refugee father. He's a wonderful speaker. Both of his parents actively opposed the Nazi regime. He's really passionate about the importance of Holocaust education today in ensuring that we all stand up against anti-Semitism, discrimination, racism and tyranny. So I really commend that Beit Midrash session to you all this Thursday at 7:30. Looking a little further ahead, I guess I just want to address myself to the children and say I hope you are lobbying your parents to be sent on spring camp, the LJY spring camp, on the 10th to the 14th of April, or on summer camp from the 15th to 28th of August. If you go on spring camp, my son Alex is leading, so you'll obviously have a brilliant time. But in any event, you'll have a wonderful time. You'll make friends for life. And for parents, I just want to say to you from my own experience that not only will your children have a brilliant and memorable time and thoroughly enjoy themselves, but they will also develop a really strong, confident and independent sense of Jewish identity, which I know is one of the reasons that we are part of Jewish community and come to synagogue. So please, please do think about sending your children to LJY. My children still haven't forgiven me for not having started that earlier in their lives. Finally, on the subject of Ukraine, we are working actively here at FPS with Liberal Judaism, with Citizens UK, with the Barnet Refugee Welcome Board, and with other local and national institutions to figure out how we can most effectively respond to this crisis. And the first step for us is to identify hosts and potential hosts and to talk through the considerations and the practicalities of hosting. We want to make sure that we are providing a network of mutual support to share information and resources. So if you are, if you can't host yourself, if we're able to provide that network, then there will be opportunities to participate and to support whether you are hosting or not. And we're also looking to help with matching hosts with refugees needing homes. This is a really fast-changing situation. So for right now, first things first, if, like me, you've already signed up to host a refugee or refugees in your home, or if you're thinking about it and you just want an opportunity to talk through what the considerations are, the practicalities, the pros and cons, please let us know. Please email Rabbi Rebecca or me and tell us that you are up for this or up for thinking about this. And we will hold an initial meeting on Tuesday the 29th. Email Zoe to let her know which of the two possible times, 10 or 7:30, is better for you, and we will confirm that. Whether or not you can host, if you feel the need to take action now, then please do consider writing to your MP to object to the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is coming back to the House of Commons in the next week or two. There are lots of template letters available online, and the Ukraine crisis does seem like a real opportunity to change this inhumane bill, which would effectively criminalise refugees seeking sanction in this country. So many of those refugees. So please do write to your MPs now. Maybe it was for just such a crisis as this that we obtained our place in the UK. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Yes, Andrea.
Next Friday, I'm going to be sleeping out with the big Barnet sleep out to raise support for Together Barnet. And I've put a link to the Just Giving page on the Facebook.
Excellent. Did everyone get that? That Andrea is participating in the Barnet Home Sleep Out?
They don't get it on the mic.
I'll put it in the chat.
And we'll put the link in the chat for donation. Thank you, Andrea. A really important support for the homeless in Barnet. Thank you, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Let's go straight to Adon Olam.
Adon Olam, Hashem Allah, B'terem kol yitzir nivra Adon Olam, Le'et nasa v'chitzo kol, Azay melech shemo nikra Adon Olam, Adon Olam, Hashem Allah, B'terem kol yitzir nivra, Le'et nasa v'chitzo kol, Azay melech shemo nikra Adon Olam, V'charei keklot hakol, Levado imlok nora Adon Olam, V'hu haya, V'hu hoved, V'hu yiyeh v'tifara Adon Olam, Adon Olam, Hashem Allah. בטרם כל יצא נברא לעת נשא בחץ כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם אחד ואין שני לעם שלו להכבירה אדון עולם בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז והמצרע אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יצא נברא לעת נשא בחץ כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם אין לי וחי גואלי וצוחב לי בעת צרה אדון עולם והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוסי ביום מקרא אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יצא נברא לעת נשא בחץ כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם בידו הפקיד רוחי בעת תשען בעירה אדון עולם ואם רוחי גבייתי אדון אני ולא ירא אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יצא נברא לעת נשא בחץ כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Let's stand, move over to the Kiddush area as we just offer a blessing for each of us as we go out to our Purim rally. Baruch atah b'voecha u'baruch atah b'tzeitecha. Blessed may you be when you come in, and also blessed may you be when you go out. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל עוד היא לעולם, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. אמן.
L'chaim. Right, off you go.
We got some wine from Monty. מלך העולם,
המוציא לחם מן הארץ.